Hi everyone, welcome. This bin that you see here in front of us is my bin of mixed red worms. It's a system that I've been wrangling with for a number of months now, trying to deal with a little bit of an outbreak of springtails. I don't know, as of the last couple check-ins, it does seem like the springtail situation has subsided, so I hope that was a trend that continues. And I hope that when we get in here, we'll see a minimal number of springtails hanging out. But if we see some, I won't be too surprised. The system has now reached a year old, so we had set our sights on doing something in here, which is something that I've never really done before, which is to harvest material out of it, treating it as a continuous flow system. So if you run a kind of a vertical system, then you'll know that as a continuous flow through, where you're pretty much ejecting finished compost out the bottom, constantly loading the top of the system with fresh bedding and fresh foods, and everything that's been thoroughly worked over comes out the bottom through a little harvesting panel or a little hatch through which you can remove this stuff. But there's other formats to that continuous sort of setup. So instead of going vertically continuous through, sometimes you set up a system like this, which is a continuous system as well, but it's meant to sort of just continuously move from left to right. So in this particular case, the system was set up in such a way that all the very heavily worked material was out here on this side. This side was never receiving any food or fresh bedding or anything, and the material is pretty much, 100% castings at this point. I mean, granted, you'll find a little bit of something in here once in a while if you look through it. It's not 100% per se, but still it is the end of the bin, which for months and months and months has never been fed or anything of that nature. It's always been this other side of the bin where we've been constantly feeding. And I've also got another system, which is a continuous flow-through system. It's a regular bag system where it does have the hatch on the bottom where you can let the finished castings out. But despite the fact that I've actually got the bag system that's a continuous flow-through, and despite the fact that this system, now a year old, has also been running as sort of a continuous flow system or a wedge system, I've never once harvested material out of any of my continuous flow format systems. Today's going to be the first time, and there's really nothing to it if you think about it. In fact, in a system like this, it's the easiest to do it because you just scoop out the stuff that's on the finished end. Over here is kind of the business end where you're always feeding, and this is where you're going to expect the worms to be hanging out, where all the moisture and the food is. I can see there's still some springtails hanging out here too. But before we get to the business of giving these little guys their 1-year birthday meal, I want to just follow through with the idea that we've been kicking around for the past couple check-ins, which is to actually finally do a harvest of the finished castings from this system. So my idea was just to take this little container here and take as much of it as I can, and I'm going to assume that we're not going to bump into many, if any, worms over on this opposite end, because this is the end that's basically been kind of left to its own devices. I mean, it's been loosely covered with some paper. Luckily, it hasn't dried out too much. I mean, here and there, it does seem like a little piece of something here and there has sort of made its way over there, a little piece of bedding or something. So I haven't been, overly careful to prevent anything from making its way over into that stuff. But I do hope that it is pretty much castings only for the most part. Maybe a little bit of compostable material blended in wouldn't be the end of the world, because my idea was to simply take this stuff straight out to the garden and feed it to my plants, basically. I didn't really have any intention of putting this stuff into storage. I guess the springtails was the main reason. I just didn't think that it was the type of material I would want to have sitting around put into storage. I just thought I would just go straight out into the garden with the stuff. And I mean, the springtails don't even really show up in very great numbers over on this finished end of the bin. They're typically over on the side of the bin where the feedings have been getting applied and where the fresh moisture is. So I have a feeling we're not going to see too much springtail activity over here, or any worm activity either, hopefully. I mean, if we bump into a worm, we'll just remove it and keep it with the rest of the gang. That's the reason I'm kind of just looking the material over a little bit after I scoop it out. But so far I don't think I've seen a worm. I mean, I could have missed one. So if I did, please write a comment and let me know. But, you know, at this point it just means that that worm is going to be released out into the great wild of my garden. So lucky worm gets to go free. Not that I think that that's really such a huge advantage over the worms that get to live down here in my wormery and get fed delicious foods and are protected from the elements and protected from predators. So in a way, worms are pretty well off, the ones that are living down here in my wormery. And you know, I didn't really plan on taking any more than what fits into this container, so that was going to be my whole harvest of castings from this system today, was whatever fits into this box here. And as you can see, this system's not too big, so it's going to account for almost half of the system's material, basically. Perhaps not, you know, entirely half, but it does show that, you know, about half of this material is stuff that the worms haven't even really had a great deal of access to, as far as a viable place to spend their time or to live, basically, because no food, no fresh bedding, no nothing on this end of the bin, basically. So the worms know better than to just, you know, hang out in stuff that's relatively dry and devoid of any food or bedding. They know where to go. They can sense the good stuff, and that's why they're all over in the feeding end of the bin. So this is, I guess, about what I planned on taking today. I've got little vent holes along the rim here, so I didn't really want to go up to that, because then they'll just be sort of spilling out through those little holes as I carry it upstairs through the house and out to the garden. So I believe that this is going to pretty much account for the harvest that we're going to take from this system today, and it's a good amount of castings. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit at the base of all my plants when I go outside to water in a few minutes. So there we go, my first actual official harvest of a continuous flow system, and that leaves us with a great deal of room in here. And I had actually thought about switching over to this opposite end of the bin to become the new feeding zone and sort of kind of flip-flop the entire arrangement of the material in here, so that the worms would have to kind of make their way over to here to get to the fresh stuff. But then I started thinking about that, and I decided that I would just sort of shift everything over. I guess this would give us a chance to sort of see if we could find any larger bits of stuff that really, you know, really belong over on the business end of the bin, instead of over here where the stuff is kind of in that pre-harvest stage. I mean, I think I felt like I could have gone further, taking even more of the system's harvested castings, but I guess we'll just save that for the next time, you know. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to run this as a continuous flow type wedge system, but it did seem like after many months of running it as one and talking about it as one, it was about time we finally, you know, did the main thing, which is to harvest the material out of it from the end of it that has all the finished material in it. And here and there I'm starting to hit like a piece of paper, a piece of cardboard, a little bit of avocado shell, little sticks or stems, little things that I'm thinking probably should be over in the end of the bin where all the activity is. And some of these bits that are sort of clumping together, I believe, are doing so because they might hold a little bit of excess moisture within them, kind of causing them to be a little bit clumpy, because they do break apart pretty readily, and I could feel moisture in them as I break them apart. So I'm going to keep shifting stuff over to this side, and this will remain in the same orientation as it has been, with that side being the end that we continue to supply the fresh bedding and food to, and this end will be the end where we've got the finished castings piling up, kind of aging and getting ready for harvest. And I guess, like I said earlier, most of this stuff that's over here probably could get harvested any time, But as I make my way over, I do find myself bumping into more and more little bits of sticks and stems and little bits of material that I feel should be over on the end where we're going to be feeding and everything else like that. So we're now getting closer and closer to the edge where we've been feeding regularly, but so far I've not even seen one worm. So the worms are pretty much all kind of cooped up over on that far end of the bin where the feedings have been getting applied. So this finished material is pretty much devoid of any worm activity, or at least I've not yet noticed any worms. And it does seem like this stuff still has little bits of material in it here and there, so I'm attempting to just cleanse it of that stuff as I bump into it. But I have a feeling, you know, despite the fact that there's not too many worms hanging out in this stuff, the material still has, you know, microbiology living in it, fungi and microbes and other things that are going to continue to work down the materials that are in there, even if the worms aren't really hanging out in this stuff too much. And as you can see, now we're starting to finally get into some more damp material here that has some worms in it. So I'm going to go pretty generous on bedding today because we've got so much room that we can pile the fresh stuff into. So I think we could just continue sort of nudging everything over. Yeah, we're definitely bumping into springtails, no surprise. This has been kind of like my springtail bin lately. And a whole bunch of worms hanging out over here. We're just going to be kind of spreading them out a little bit, and I think they're going to appreciate getting a nice big heavy-duty load of fresh bedding and food and everything over on the far end. So I bought down a whole bunch of soiled paper towels that I wanted to compost. I've got my prepared bedding on the ready. I've even got my squirt bottle so that we can make sure everything's nice and damp and cozy so that the worms come over. And then I've got some yummy food for them. I've got some grit we can include with the feeding. So they should be really appreciative of what we ended up setting up for them over here once we're done resetting. So here we're just sort of bumping into little bits and pieces of the last feeding. This looks to me like newspaper bundles. Maybe I had bundled up the food portions for them into little wrapped care packages. I don't remember exactly. I didn't review the video from the last check-in. So here we're starting to see a great deal more worm traffic. These do look like they're little bundles that we sort of created here for them. So this is all supplementary leftover bedding from the last feeding. I'm just trying to sort of break it apart a little bit so that it can be blended in with the surrounding materials. Like I said before, we're going to go pretty generous on giving them a whole bunch of fresh bedding and moisture, food, all that fun stuff to give them a nice increased place to be and to hang out and to live in. So here are the stuff in the middle now. So we've got, you know, the typical arrangement here where the one end of the bin has the fairly finished material in it. Over here, perhaps not completely finished, but if we give it some more time, it'll dry a little bit more. It'll continue to steadily break down a little bit. What we'll be putting in on the opposite end is all fresh, brand new stuff. And over here in the middle is a bunch of stuff that's well on its way to getting worked down, but is still pretty much in progress and needs some time to get worked down till it too becomes finished castings. So we've definitely given them a good bit of extra room here into which we can now come in with a whole bunch of nice fresh bedding. Perhaps we'll start with my prepared bedding, which is just a whole bunch of like shredded paper and cardboard and stuff like that. So we'll take perhaps a nice big handful or two. I guess we could start with just one big handful and drop that down in here, because this ain't really a very large system. It's not very deep. These are my shallowest bins that I've got here. It's actually two bins, one within the other. Here you can see why, because the handle broke off the upper bin. So I just keep it within another bin. And these both bins have perforations to them as well. So I figured if I were to use two perforated bins, one in the other, then perhaps the material wouldn't fall through. In fact, I think I might have even placed something in between the two bins to prevent stuff from falling through. So here we've got some of the stuff I talked about earlier. Here's the feeding zone indicator, which was resting out on top of the feeding zone. I think we're going to use that as supplementary bedding too. And then here are all those soiled paper towels that I made reference to earlier. So my idea here was to perhaps do something similar to last feeding, which is to create little food bundles, or at least combine the foods with pieces of paper towel. So like this first little portion here is bits of lettuce, bits of cucumber, skin, peels, whatever you want to call it. So perhaps here too we'll just use the paper towels as the bundling material into which we're going to wrap today's food supply. So here we've got a slice of cucumber, a little piece of onion, the butt end of a head of romaine lettuce. This will be the next little food bundle for them. I do have a good number of these soiled paper towels here that we could use, so we'll be generous. Here's some more stuff. I guess this must be mostly stuff that was used to create salads, perhaps not the jalapeno pepper core, but most everything else in this bundle of food is stuff that looks like it might have been used for salad prep. So this is perhaps not a paper towel. This might just be a napkin here or something similar. We're definitely spreading this food out nice and thoroughly here. It doesn't seem like a feeding much larger than any other feeding would normally be, but I think just the way we're creating little bundles out of it and wrapping each in its own individual little care package is making it seem like a whole lot more food than it really is. I don't think it is all that much. And here's the last of the paper towels. So we'll just drop in what remains of the food. And that's pretty much going to be their feeding. I do have a replacement feeding zone indicator, another old coffee filter that we could drop in on top of the feeding zone once we're finished. But before we cover up to the point where we can mark our feeding zone with the feeding zone indicator, I'd still like to cover up a little bit better than this, so I'm going to come back in with my prepared bedding. But first, why don't we drop in a little bit of grit, because the worms always seem to appreciate a little bit of grit. In my case, I'm using pulverized eggshell as the grit. And even though it probably isn't going to be all that necessary to do so, I figured I would just come in here with a little bit of supplementary moisture, just as a little 1-year anniversary gift, because the worms always love perhaps a little bit excess moisture, even if you might find it to be moisture that you consider to be more than is really needed in the bin. It's times like that that I believe that the worms really tend to appreciate it, because I guess we worm farmers like our material in our bins to flow a little bit, whereas the worms, I think, tend to like stuff to be kind of sopping wet and almost muddy. So I think that's what I was kind of after right there today. Basically, a nice, thorough reset of the system after harvesting a nice batch of castings from this continuous flow system, from this wedge configured system. And to finish off, on goes the customary feeding zone indicator. Pretty good sized feeding zone now compared to what they've been having to deal with lately, as far as a nice, nice big space versus a cramped space that they've been living in recently. So I think we're going to stick with the coverings that we've been using for some time now, paper only. I think it's been working pretty well. It's been adequately preserving the system's moisture, not letting things become too dry, because I think that the 2 layers seem to do that quite well. So I think we're just going to stick with it for now. All right, everyone, that's it. I've got a couple things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, Please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.